Captain Ellis had seen many recruits walk through the heavy steel doors of his command room. Most were nervous, some were arrogant, and a few had the haunted eyes of those who had already seen too much war. He thought he knew what to expect every time. But on that day, when the doors slid open with a hiss, the figure that stepped through was nothing like what he had imagined. She was tall, taller than most of his crew, and her movements were slow, deliberate, as though every step carried the weight of history. Her skin shimmered like liquid silver, catching the harsh white lights of the command room and breaking them into soft reflections. And her eyes, there were 4 of them, set in a face that was almost human but not quite. 2 eyes looked forward, steady and unflinching. The other 2, slightly higher on her brow, blinked slowly as though studying the entire room at once. For a moment no one spoke. The air grew heavy. Ellis felt the shift in his crew before he saw it, shoulders tensing, jaws tightening, a silent wave of unease spreading across the bridge. Even the officers who had survived the siege of Vega, the ones with more scars than hair, shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Everyone knew what she was. She was not just new. She was not just different. She was one of them. Ellis's chest tightened. He remembered the firestorms over the colony of Hartwell, the reports of families burned alive, the messages that never came back from his brother's unit. He remembered the orders that had come down, shoot on sight. And now, years later, one of the enemy stood before him, wearing the uniform of an assistant assigned to him. Not by choice, by command. The alien did not flinch under the stares. She bowed her head once, a movement sharp and practiced. When she spoke, her voice was softer than Ellis expected, gentle, melodic, carrying a strange echo that brushed against the ears. "My designation is Sarai," she said. "I am honored to serve." The words were correct. They were polite. But Ellis could not stop the flicker of doubt in his mind. Did she mean them? Or was it just training drilled into her, the way soldiers were taught to salute even when they hated the officer they saluted? He studied her carefully. Her hands, long, slender, with too many joints, were folded neatly behind her back. Her posture was perfect, almost unnaturally so. She looked calm, but Ellis had been in the service long enough to know that calmness could be a mask. He thought he saw something else there, hidden beneath the silver skin and formal tone. Not arrogance, not defiance, something quieter, something closer to pain. Still, he could not let his guard drop. Not yet. "Assistant Sarai," Ellis said, his voice firm, steady. "This crew has one purpose, to survive and to serve. Whatever your past, whatever your people once did, you are here now. You follow orders. You don't question them. Understand?" Her 4 eyes focused on him at once. For a moment, Ellis felt like she could see straight through him, into the anger and the grief he kept buried deep. Then slowly, she nodded. "I understand." The sound of her voice sent a ripple through the room. Some of the crew shifted, muttered under their breath. Ellis caught fragments. Why her? Can't trust it. Enemy blood. He raised a hand, silencing them, but the words hung in the air like smoke. Sarai did not react. She stood still, hands clasped, gaze forward. Not once did she look back at the crew that whispered against her. Not once did she lower her head in shame. Ellis hated to admit it, but that quiet strength unsettled him more than open defiance would have. As the room slowly returned to order, Ellis leaned back in his chair, still watching her. He had expected an enemy. He had expected bitterness, arrogance, or maybe even fear. What he found instead was something he couldn't quite name. Something different. Something that made the weight in his chest shift ever so slightly, though he didn't know why. That day, Captain Ellis told himself one simple truth. His new assistant was not like anyone else. She was alien in every way, and yet, in some strange, unexplainable way, she already felt important. Captain Ellis knew peace was only a word written on paper. Yes, the war had ended. Yes, treaties were signed. But inside the hearts of men and women, the fire still burned. And on his ship among his crew, that fire was never far from turning into open flames. Every corridor carried whispers. Whispers about the new assistant. Whispers about Ellis himself. Why would command assign him an alien? Was it punishment? Was it some twisted experiment? Ellis ignored most of it. He had learned long ago that a captain who listens to gossip loses control of the ship. But when he walked the halls, he could feel the stares. They weren't looking at him. They were looking past him, at the silver-skinned figure walking silently by his side. Sarai never spoke unless spoken to. She never showed anger, even when sailors muttered cruel words under their breath as she passed. Murderer. Enemy. Monster. Ellis heard it all, though never loud enough to punish. It was cowardice, the kind of hate that hides in whispers. Still, Sarai worked without hesitation. Every order Ellis gave was carried out with precision. She learned faster than any recruit he had ever seen. She memorized the ship's layouts within days, studied the human systems until she could fix them better than most engineers, and anticipated Ellis's needs before he even gave voice to them. And yet, Ellis kept his distance. He told himself, it was necessary. She was the enemy. His brother Daniel had died at Vega, cut down during one of the alien assaults. Ellis had never seen the body, just a folded flag and a few official words that felt emptier than space itself. That pain still lived in him. And no matter how polite Sarai was, no matter how efficient, she wore the face of the people who had taken Daniel from him. At night, when the hum of the engines was the only sound in his quarters, Ellis often stared at the ceiling and argued with himself. She's not him, she didn't kill him, she wasn't even there. But another voice always answered back, does it matter? She's one of them. Her kind lit the fires. Her kind took everything from you. It was a cycle he couldn't break, not yet, and Sarai, she seemed to know. There were moments, small ones, that Ellis caught something in her expression. When she walked through the mess hall and the chatter dimmed to silence. When she handed him reports with perfect posture, only for her extra pair of eyes to glance down, quickly as if avoiding something painful. She wore her calmness like armor, but Ellis knew armor when he saw it. Beneath it, there was something else. One evening, he overheard two officers in the control bay. They were speaking in low tones, thinking Ellis wasn't near. I don't care what command says, one muttered. You can't trust those things. My cousin was on Vega. You know what they did. The other officer nodded. She'll crack one day, just wait. When it happens, she'll take us all down with her. Ellis turned the corner and both men snapped to attention, guilt flashing across their faces. He said nothing. He didn't defend Sarai. He didn't reprimand them. He only walked past jaw tight, anger burning, not just at them, but at himself. Because deep down, a part of him agreed with their words. And yet he couldn't ignore the facts. Every day, Sarai worked, harder than any human recruit. She stayed longer at her station, reviewed more data, and kept the ship running smoother than before. She never once complained. She never once lashed out, even when insulted. It was as if she carried an invisible weight, one that no one else could see. Ellis began to wonder. What ghosts haunted her? Did she lose someone, the way he had? Did she stand on her world and watch it burn the way humans had watched theirs? He didn't ask. Not yet. But the question lingered in his mind like a shadow. For now he kept his walls high and his voice firm. He gave her orders. She followed them, and the ship sailed on. But Captain Ellis knew something was coming. Something would break this fragile distance between them. And when it did, when the truth finally surfaced, he wasn't sure whether it would bring healing or tear open wounds so deep they could never close. Because peace, he realized, was never simple. It was fragile, and fragile things always carried cracks. The ship was quiet that night. The long corridors glowed with dim blue lights, and the steady hum of the engines pulsed like a heartbeat through the walls. Most of the crew had retired, to their quarters. Only a handful remained on night watch, their voices low, their steps heavy with routine. Captain Ellis had been restless. He couldn't sleep. Too many thoughts haunted him, about his brother, about the war, about the silver-skinned figure who now walked the same halls as his men. He wandered without much purpose, hands clasped behind his back, boots echoing softly against the metal floor. He thought he might make a quick round to the observation deck before returning to his cabin. He didn't expect anyone to be there. That place was usually empty at this hour. But when the doors slid open with a quiet hiss, he froze. Sarai was there. She stood near the wide glass wall, her figure framed against the endless sea of stars. The silver of her skin reflected the starlight, making her look almost like a sculpture carved from light itself. She wasn't standing tall and proud as she usually did on duty. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, her arms wrapped around her middle, as if trying to hold herself together. Ellis almost turned back, not wanting to intrude, but then he heard it, a sound, soft and trembling. Words in a language he did not understand. They fell from her lips like pieces of broken glass, sharp, fragile, filled with pain. Her voice cracked, low and raw, carrying a grief so deep that it felt heavy even in a language foreign to his ears. Ellis's breath caught in his throat. He had heard that sound before. Not those words, not that language, but that sound. It was the same sound he himself had made long ago, when he stood over his brother's grave with a flag folded in his hands. The same sound that spilled out of him when the finality of loss had struck, when no strength, no armor, no training could hide the truth of a broken heart. Sarai was not a machine. She was not a perfect soldier without weakness. She was grieving. Ellis stood in the doorway for a long time, silent, unsure. He should have turned away, should have given her privacy, but he could not move. His feet felt rooted to the floor, his chest heavy with something he could not name. At last, Sarai wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and straightened, as if pulling a mask back over her face. Her 4 eyes blinked rapidly, and her posture returned to its usual precision. She turned, and in the reflection of the glass she saw him standing there. For a moment neither spoke. Her eyes widened, only for an instant, before narrowing again, calm and composed. She dipped her head slightly. "Captain," she said, her voice even now, though faint traces of that broken melody still lingered in the air. "Forgive me. I did not expect anyone at this hour." Ellis hesitated. A dozen responses rose to his lips and died there. He wanted to say, "I heard you." He wanted to ask, "Who did you lose?" But the words caught in his throat. He was afraid. Afraid of knowing. Afraid of the walls inside him cracking the way hers had. Instead, he only nodded. "The deck is yours. I'll leave you to it." He turned to go, but before he stepped through the door, her voice reached him again, soft, almost a whisper. "Do you know," she said, "that the stars look different when you have lost everything beneath them?" Ellis froze, his back to her, his hand hovering over the door control. His heart clenched at her words. They were simple, yet they carried the weight of both their worlds. He did not reply. He didn't trust his voice. Slowly, he stepped out into the hallway, and the door closed between them. But as he walked back to his cabin, one thought echoed in his mind, louder than the hum of the engines, louder than the voices of doubt inside him. She carries ghosts, too. The next morning, Captain Ellis walked into the command deck earlier than usual. He hadn't slept much. His mind kept replaying the night before. The sound of Sarai's broken voice, the way her shoulders curled as if holding invisible pain. He had always thought of her as unshakable, almost too perfect in her silence. But now he knew there were cracks in that armor. He carried a small cup of tea in his hand. It was a habit of his, every morning, a strong, steaming brew. But this time, he brought 2. He set one quietly on Sarai's console without saying anything. Sarai looked at the cup as if it were some strange artifact. All four of her eyes blinked in quick succession. She hesitated, her long fingers hovering over it, then finally picked it up. She smelled it cautiously, then glanced at Ellis. "Is this for me?" she asked softly. Ellis gave a short nod. "It's just tea, nothing special." For a long second, she only stared at the cup. Then something happened, something Ellis hadn't seen before. She smiled. Not the polite, careful smile she gave when officers passed by. This one was smaller, gentler, uncertain but real. It changed her face completely. "Thank you, Captain," she whispered. That was the beginning. Over the next days, small gestures followed. Ellis found himself asking her opinions on reports even when he didn't need them. She gave answers that were sharp, thoughtful, and sometimes surprising. When a navigation problem arose, she solved it in minutes with a perspective no human would have considered. And slowly, Ellis began to notice how the crew's glares softened. They didn't trust her yet, but they watched. They saw. One evening, while reviewing charts in the briefing room, Ellis asked without thinking, "Do you miss your home?" Sarai froze. Her silver skin seemed to dim, as if the light itself bent away. Her eyes lowered. For a moment, Ellis regretted the question, but then, in a quiet voice, she answered. "I had a sister," she said. "Younger, curious. She used to sit by the window of our dwelling and count the passing ships. She wanted to join the stars one day." She paused, and her fingers clenched. The edge of the table. "She never had the chance. When your people bombed my city, she was there." Ellis's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to explain, to defend. But what defense could he give? He remembered standing on a burned colony, himself watching human children being carried from the rubble. He remembered swearing revenge. "I'm sorry," he said at last. The words felt too small, too weak, but they were all he had. Sarai met his gaze with her 4 eyes. There was no anger there, only sorrow. "I know you lost family too," she whispered. "I can see it in the way you look at the stars." The words hit him like a strike. He hadn't told her about Daniel. He hadn't told anyone in years. But somehow she knew. After that, their talks grew longer. Sometimes they spoke of duty, sometimes of loss, sometimes of simple things. What human food tasted like, what alien music sounded like. Ellis found himself laughing at her dry humor, surprised that she even had it. And in those moments, the space between them grew smaller. The crew noticed. Some whispered less. Some even nodded to her when she passed. Trust was still far, but the seed had been planted. One night, Ellis stood again on the observation deck. This time, Sarai joined him. Not by accident, but by choice. They looked out at the stars in silence, the wounds of 2 different worlds glowing faintly in the same vast sky. For the first time since the war ended, Ellis felt a strange, unfamiliar thing stirring in his chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close to hope. Because in that quiet, he realized something important. They were no longer just captain and assistant, soldier and alien. They were survivors, and survivors needed each other. The warning sirens cut through the ship like knives. Red lights flashed along the corridors, and the calm hum of the engines was drowned out by the roar of alarms. Captain Ellis was already moving, his boots pounding against the floor as the intercom shouted, "Enemy contact. Unknown vessels approaching fast. Possible pirate ambush." The bridge was chaos. Officers scrambled to stations, voices overlapping, fingers flying across glowing screens. The main display lit up with the sight of jagged ships closing in. Pirates, ruthless, desperate, the kind who attacked anything that moved. "Shields up, all batteries, prepare to fire," Ellis barked, his voice cutting through the noise. The first blast slammed into the hull. The deck shuddered violently, throwing several crew members to the floor. Sparks rained from the ceiling. The ship groaned like a wounded beast. "Return fire," Ellis shouted. "Don't let them pin us down." The crew obeyed. But the pirates had the advantage. They swarmed like wolves, striking fast, tearing at the ship's defenses. The bridge shook again as another blast ripped through the side. Ellis gripped the railing, scanning the chaos. He saw Sarai at her station, moving with calm precision even as the room burned around her. Her hands danced across the controls, rerouting power, strengthening shields, her voice clear and steady as she relayed data. Then, without warning, the world exploded. A blast tore straight through the side of the bridge. Metal screamed, fire surged, and Ellis was thrown like a rag doll. His back slammed against the console, and then weight, crushing weight, pinned him down. Twisted steel had fallen across his chest, trapping him. He gasped, choking on smoke, his body screaming in pain. Around him, voices shouted, but they felt far away. His vision blurred. He struggled to move, to breathe, but the weight was too much. This is it, he thought dimly. This is how it ends. Then, through the haze, a figure appeared. Sarai. Her silver skin was scorched, streaked with soot. One arm bleeding a dark blue that dripped down her side. Yet her 4 eyes locked onto him with fierce determination. Without hesitation, she dropped to her knees beside him. "Stay still," she said firmly, her voice breaking through the chaos. She gripped the steel beam and strained. Muscles in her long arms tightened, her body trembling with effort. The metal groaned but refused to move. Smoke choked the air and Ellis coughed, his strength fading. "You can't," he tried to say, but the words caught in his throat. Sarai's gaze snapped to him, blazing with fire. "I will not lose another." The words cut through him. They weren't just orders. They weren't just determination. They were a promise, born from the same pain he carried. With a cry, she lifted again. This time, the beam shifted. Inch by inch, she forced it away, her arms straining until at last it clattered to the side. Ellis gasped for air, his chest burning with relief. Then her arms were under him, lifting him as if he weighed nothing. She cradled him against her chest, moving through the fire and smoke with steady steps. Bullets sparked against the walls, alarms screamed, but she never faltered. Ellis felt his head rest against her shoulder. For a moment he was too weak to speak. But as he looked up at her face, scarred, bleeding, yet unbroken, something shifted inside him. She wasn't his enemy. Not here. Not now. She was his savior. Sarai carried him through the chaos, her voice, low but fierce. "Hold on, Captain. You are not dying today." The medics rushed to meet them in the corridor, pulling Ellis onto a stretcher. As they worked, he caught one last glimpse of Sarai. Her chest rose and fell heavily, her silver skin cracked and burned. But her eyes, those 4 unwavering eyes, still shone with fire. And in that fire, Ellis saw the truth. She wasn't fighting, just for herself. She wasn't fighting because of orders. She was fighting for him. For all of them. And in that moment, Captain Ellis knew. His test had come. And she had passed it, not with words, but with fire and blood. The battle was over. The pirates had retreated, their ship scattered into the black void, leaving wreckage and silence in their wake. The ship still floated, scarred and battered, but alive. For hours, repair crews worked to contain the damage. The corridor smelled of smoke and metal, the walls marked with black scars where fire had licked them. Medics rushed through the ship, tending to the wounded. And in the middle of it all, Captain Ellis sat on a stretcher with bandages wrapped across his ribs, refusing to rest. His thoughts were on only one person, Sarai. He had seen her collapse after carrying him out of the burning bridge. Her body had finally given way, dropping into the medic's arms, her silver skin cracked, her blood pooling dark against the floor. The image stayed with him, sharper than the flames, sharper than the pain in his chest. Now, hours later, he found himself standing in the infirmary. His own wounds still hurt, but he barely felt them. His eyes were fixed on the bed where Sarai lay. She looked smaller now, weaker. Her skin, once shining like liquid metal, was pale and dull under the medical lights. Tubes ran into her arms, monitors beeped softly beside her. For the first time, Ellis saw her not as a soldier, not as an alien, but simply as someone who had given too much. He sat down beside her bed, his hands resting heavily on his knees. For a long time, he just stared, unsure what to say. He had commanded men, led them into fire, buried them after battle, but he had never been good with words when it came to gratitude. Finally, her eyes fluttered open. All four of them, tired and dim but still holding that strange, steady light. "Captain." Her voice was weak, but it carried warmth. Ellis leaned forward. "Don't talk. You need to rest." A faint smile touched her lips. "Rest is easier now." She shifted slightly, wincing as pain moved through her body. "The ship? Safe?" Ellis nodded. "We survived. Because of you." Silence stretched between them. Ellis's throat felt tight. At last, the question he had held inside since the fire slipped out. "Why?" His voice cracked, low and raw. "Why did you save me? You could have run. You could have left me there. Why throw yourself into the flames for me?" Sarai studied him for a long moment. Her eyes blinked slowly, and then she spoke, her voice steady despite her weakness. "Because someone must end the cycle," she whispered. "Hate kills. Kindness heals. My people. Your people. We have both lost too much. I could not let another death feed the fire." Her words struck him harder than any battle ever had. He swallowed, his chest aching with more than just wounds. He thought of his brother. He thought of her sister. 2 lives taken, 2 worlds scarred. For years he had believed the only answer was strength, revenge, survival through steel. But, now looking at her broken body in the bed, he saw another answer. "Kindness heals," he repeated softly, as if testing the words. Sarai closed her eyes, but her lips curved in the faintest smile. "You see it too now, don't you?" Ellis didn't trust himself to speak, so he only nodded. His hand, almost without thinking, reached out and rested gently over hers. Her fingers twitched, cool and trembling under his touch, but she didn't pull away. In the days that followed, word spread across the ship. The crew, hardened men and women who had once spat the word alien like poison, had seen her throw herself into the fire for their captain. They had seen her bleed. They had seen her protect. The whispers changed. No longer mutters of monster or traitor. Now they said other things. She saved him. She's one of us. Maybe she's not what we thought. Ellis noticed it too. When Sarai walked the corridors again, still weak, still healing, crew members no longer turned their backs. Some even gave her small nods of respect. A few offered quiet words of thanks. And Ellis? He stayed close. Not as a guard, not as a wary captain keeping an eye on a stranger, but as something more. He had once thought she was his punishment. Then he thought she was his test. But now, sitting by her side as she slowly healed, he realized the truth. She was his bridge, the living proof that peace was not just ink on paper. It was flesh and blood, pain and sacrifice. And she had chosen it, even when no one else did. Weeks passed. The ship healed slowly, its metal patched, its systems repaired. The crew healed too, though the scars of the ambush remained. But the biggest change was not in steel or flesh. It was in the way the crew looked at Sarai. At first they had only stared in silence. Some still doubted, still held on to the bitterness of war. But over time the silence shifted. A mechanic handed her a tool without being asked. A pilot gave her a small nod after she corrected his charts. A medic stopped her in the corridor just to whisper, "Thank you." For Sarai it was strange ground. She walked through the ship with the same quiet grace, but Ellis could see the difference. The stiffness in her posture was softer now. Her extra eyes blinked less defensively. She no longer looked like a stranger bracing for attack. She looked like someone who belonged. And for Ellis, that realization cut deep. He remembered the first day she walked onto his bridge. The glares, the whispers, the weight of his own anger pressing on his chest. He had sworn he would never trust her. He had sworn no alien could be more than an enemy. But now, when she stepped onto the bridge again after her recovery, every eye turned to her, not with suspicion, but with respect. Even the veterans of Vega, men who once cursed her kind, gave her room with a quiet dignity. They had seen her carry their captain through fire. They had seen her bleed for their survival, and in space where survival meant everything, that was enough to change hearts. Ellis rose from his chair as she entered. The moment their eyes met, he felt something shift inside him. Her silver skin still bore faint scars, her movements still carried the weight of pain, but her gaze, those 4 steady eyes, were unbroken. The bridge grew silent. No one spoke. Everyone waited to see how their captain would respond. Ellis stepped forward. His boots echoed softly on the steel floor. He stopped in front of her, his face unreadable. For a heartbeat, Sarai looked uncertain, as though the mask she wore on her first day might return. Then Ellis did something none of the crew expected. He extended his hand. The silence grew heavier, but Sarai's expression softened. Slowly, carefully, she placed her hand in his. Her long fingers curled around his palm, cool against his skin. For a brief second, it was not captain and assistant, not human and alien. It was simply 2 survivors standing together. Ellis's voice carried through the bridge, strong but filled with quiet emotion. "This ship has many scars," he said. "So do we. But scars are proof of survival. And this one," he glanced at Sarai, "is proof that enemies can become something more. Proof that we are stronger together than apart." The crew listened, silent, but moved. They had followed Ellis into fire before. Now they followed him into something harder. Acceptance. Sarai's head dipped slightly, a small bow of respect. But her eyes shone brighter than Ellis had ever seen. Later that night, Ellis found himself on the observation deck again. The stars stretched out endlessly, cold and distant, but for the first time he did not feel alone beneath them. Footsteps echoed behind him, soft and steady. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. Sarai stood beside him, gazing at the same stars. For a while they said nothing. Words were not needed. Finally Ellis spoke, his voice low. "You were right." Sarai tilted her head. "About what, Captain?" "About the stars," Ellis said. "They do look different after loss, but maybe they can also look different after hope." Her lips curved in a faint smile, and all 4 eyes shimmered with reflected starlight. And in that quiet, Ellis understood why she was special. Not because she was alien, not because she had 4 eyes or silver skin, not because she was different. She was special because, in a universe scarred by war and hate, she had chosen kindness. She had reminded them all of what it meant to hold on, to protect, to heal. She had reminded them all what it meant to be human.